What's going on, everyone? In this video, we'll be creating a custom command and event handler for our Discord bot using Discord.js. So a command handler is basically a way of organizing your codebase to make it easier to register, edit, or delete commands. The event handler is something similar but for events. Matter of fact, that is the first thing that we're going to start working on. This video might feel a little more fast-paced compared to my previous videos because there's a lot to cover. So feel free to slow down the playback speed if you feel like it. Let's get started by first creating an events folder. This is where all our events folders will go. So let's create a folder inside of this called ready. This folder will handle any code that we want to run when the ready event is triggered. We also want a folder for when an interaction is triggered. So let's create an interaction create folder. Let's also create a file inside the ready folder called console.log.js because we want to console log when the bot comes online. I'm also going to create a file inside interaction create called handle commands.js because this is going to be handling our slash commands. Of course, we're not putting any code in here for now. We're just setting up the folder structure. Let's now also create another folder called commands. Inside this, we'll be adding folders in order to categorize our commands. So first, let's start by creating a folder called misc. Inside this, let's create a file called ping.js. Now let's also create another folder called moderation. And inside this, we'll create a file called ban.js. Again, we're not adding any code in these. All we're doing is creating the folder structure. Once all that is done, we can start working on how we want to handle all this new stuff. Let's create another folder called handlers. And inside this, I'll create a file called eventhandler.js. This file will, as the name suggests, handle all our events inside the events folder. The event handler file will export a function. So let's say module.exports, and let's export a function. Let's now save this file and go to our index.js and clear any existing event listeners that we might have. I just have the ready event listener, so I'm going to remove that. And let's replace it with the event handler function. So let me just say event handler. So I'm going to import it and make sure you call this as a function. Let's also pass in the client as an argument because that's what we're going to be using in order to handle all the events. We can now close out of this file, and inside the event handler, we can now use client as a parameter. The first thing to do inside this function is to get all the folders inside of the events folder. However, that is a step that we're going to do a lot of times. So let's just create a reusable function inside another file. I'm going to create a folder called utils. Inside this, I'm going to create a file called getAllFiles.js. This will also export a function. So let's say module.exports. And let's export a function. This will have two parameters. The first one is the directory of where we want to get all the files or folders from. The second parameter is going to be folders only. This by default is going to be false. And if it is true, then we're only going to return folders from a specific path. Now be sure to import fs. So let's do const fs require fs. And let's also import path. So let's say const path require path. Let's first start by creating a variable called file names and set it to an empty array. Now the next thing that we want to do is use this directory and import any folders or files inside a specific directory. So let's say const files equals fs read_dir sync. And inside this, we're first going to pass the directory. And the second argument is going to be an object. And the property is going to be with file types. Make sure you set this to true because this is going to help us distinguish between files and folders. Now let's loop through all of these files because we want to check if it's a file or a folder. So let's say for const file of files. Inside of this, we're first going to create a file path that is going to at the end be pushed to the file names array. So let's say path.join, and the first thing that we're going to pass in is the directory, and the second thing is the name of the file or folder. So let's say file.name. Let's now check if folders only is true. So let's say if folders only. Now we can check if this file is a folder. So let's say if file.isDirectory, and this is a method. If it is, then we're going to push it into this file names array. So let's say file names.push, and we're going to push in the path to this folder. Now inside the else statement, we're going to check if the file is a file. So let's say if file.isFile, then we're going to do the same thing. Now at the end, let's make sure to actually return this file names. So let's say return file names. and we can now save this file. We can go back to our event handler, and the first thing that we want to do here is say const event folders. And this is going to be a list of all the folders inside of this events folder. So we can use the get all files function. So let's say get all files. And the first thing that we're going to pass in is, of course, the directory. So let's use the path library for that. So let's say const path require path. So the argument is going to be like path.join dir name. And since we're inside the handlers folder right now, we can just go up one level. And now we can target the events folder. So let's say events. The second argument inside the get all files function needs to be set to true because we only want the folders. Now let's console log this and see what we get. Let's save the file and run index.js. As you can see, we have an array with the path to the folders and not the files. Let's now loop through all of these folders. So let's say for const event folder of event folders. And the first thing that we're going to do is get all the files inside of the event folder. So let's say const event files equals, we're going to use the get all files again. And this time we're going to be using the path of event folder. Let's again console log event files to see what we get. If I save it and run it, you're going to see we have handle commands.js and console log.js. Now what we want to do is we want to get the name of the event based on the folder name. So let's say const event name, and we're going to say event folder.replace. Now, if you're on Windows, then you're not going to have forward slashes like I did over here, and you're going to have backslashes. So what we want to do is we want to replace those backslashes with forward slashes. So I'm going to use some regex for that. This regex right here will replace all the backslashes with forward slashes, and let's replace it with forward slashes so there's some consistency. Let's split where the forward slashes are, and let's do pop. Pop is basically the last element of an array, which is going to be the name of the folder. Let's console log the event name to see what we get. If I save the file and restart it, you're going to see we have interaction, create, and ready. Now, based on this, we can add an event listener and pass in all the event files. So let's say client.on, and then we can pass in the event name. Now we're going to get access to the argument, and this is going to be a function. Let's make this async because we might want to do some asynchronous tasks. And what we want to do here is loop through all of the files. So let's say for const event file of event files. And now what we want to do is we want to extract the function out of the files. And the way we're going to do that is let's open one of the files and export a function. So let's say module.export and export a function. Let's save this and let's just copy this onto the second file as well. And now we're going to define the function that is inside of these files. So let's say const event function and set it to require event file. And now what we want to do is we want to run the function inside of these files. So let's say await event function. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to pass in the client because an event might need that. And we're also going to pass in this argument. Let's go inside of the handle commands.js file. And since it's inside the interaction create folder, we are going to first have access to the client because we passed in client, but we're also going to have access to another argument, which is going to be the interaction in this case, because it is the interaction create event listener. We can save this for now because we're not really going to be handling any commands yet. We're going to come back to this later. Inside console log.js, we can get the client. And now we can console log. So let's say console log client.user.tag is online. Let's save this file and let's now run our bot to see if everything is working. As you can see, not under control is online. So our event listener is working. However, I do want to do one thing, which is sort all of the files that we get inside folders so that you can give others priority over others using numbers in the file names. So let's say event files.sort, and we're going to get access to A and B, which we can return if A is greater than B. Let's console log the event files to see if everything is working. I'm now going to use nodemon because I want this to restart every time we save a file. Now, just to test, I'm going to create a file inside the interaction create folder called 01test.js. If I save it, we're going to get 01test.js first. If I create another file called 02test.js, we're going to see 01test.js and 02test.js. So the functions are going to run in order. I can delete these files for now because we don't really need them anymore. Now our event handler is done, so we can close out of this file, and we can also close out of get all files. Now what we want to do is we want to register commands when the bot comes online. So let's go to the events folder, go inside ready, and create a new file called register commands.js. And matter of fact, I'm going to put 01 over here because we want to give it the highest priority. So let's save that. And this is going to export a function, of course, and this is going to give us access to the client and the client again. We don't really need the second client because the first one is the same. So I'm just going to remove that altogether. Now, before we get started with this, there are a few things that we need to do. We need to create a config.json in our root directory. So let's say config.json. And inside over here, we're going to define a bunch of stuff. The first one is going to be the test server. So go ahead and copy the ID of your testing server and paste it over here. The next thing that you want to add is the client ID. So let's go ahead and copy our bot's ID and paste that over here. And the last thing that we're going to add is called devs. And this is going to be an array of all the developers. Basically, we're going to be adding features to our commands, and we're going to be checking if dev only is set to true in a specific command. If it is, then only developers will be able to run that specific command. So for now, I'm just going to set myself as the developer. Of course, you can add as many people as you want in here by just adding a comma and adding their user IDs just like this. Let's now save the config.json file and go inside register commands, and let's import the config.json file. So let's say const, and I'm going to destructure everything. So I'm going to say require, and I'm going to go up to config.json. And now what we're going to need here is the test server and the devs. Actually, we don't even need the devs. The devs are going to be used inside interaction create. So let's save this for now. Now what we want to do is we want to first get all the files inside of commands. So I'm going to create a function inside utils called getLocalCommands.js. And this is going to get all the commands locally. Basically, the reason why I even added local instead of just saying get commands is because we're going to be creating another function that will be getting commands from our Discord bot. Now, of course, this is going to be a function. So let's just say module.exports and export a function. We can add a parameter called exceptions. And what this will do is it will exclude specific commands based on your choice. Now let's do something similar to get all files and create a variable called local commands and set it to an empty array. Let's return this local commands because this is what's going to be returned from this entire function. Now we also have to import path. So let's say const path equals require path. And we also have to import get all files. So let's say require, and we're going to get all files. Now, if you see our commands folder structure, you'll notice we have categories. So let's go ahead and get these folders of categories first. So let's say const command categories equals get all files. And the first argument is going to be path.join dir name, which is going to be our current directory. Now, since we're inside utils, we have to go up one level and target the commands folder. The second argument is going to be folders only, and we must set that to true because we're trying to get the folders. Let's now console log these command categories and see what we get. Of course, in order to run this, we have to run it over here. So let's say get local commands. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this inside a variable called local commands, and I'm going to console log it. Let's save it and let's see what we get. As you can see, we get misc and moderation, so that is working just fine. I've also just realized we haven't removed their previous console log, so let's go to eventhandler.js and remove that. Let's save it, and now we only see misc and moderation, which is our command categories. So that's working just fine. Now inside of this, we're going to do something very similar to what we did with the events folders. Let's first loop over these categories. So let's say for const command category of command categories. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to get all the files inside of the category. So let's say const command files equals get all files, and the directory is going to be this command category. Let's console log the command files to see what we get. So if I save this, we're seeing ping.js and ban.js in two separate arrays, so that's working just fine. Now what we want to do is we want to create some objects inside of our commands file. So let's do module.exports and let's export an object. The first thing is going to be the name of the command. So this is a ping command, so we're just going to say ping. The next thing is the description, and we can just say pong for now. We're also going to have dev only, which is going to be a boolean, and I can comment this out. We're also going to have test only, which again is going to be a boolean. The next thing is going to be options, which is going to be an array of objects. And I'm going to show you how to add these later on. Finally, we also have a function called callback. You can call this whatever you like, but callback is a good name. And we're going to have two parameters. One is going to be the client and the other is going to be the interaction. And inside over here, you can deal with the command logic however you like. For now, we can just say interaction.reply and we can say pong and we can pass in the client WebSocket ping. We can save this file. Now inside of our local commands file, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to loop through all the files that we got from the folder. So let's say for command file or const command file of command files. And the first thing that we're going to do is say const command object equals require, and we're going to require the command file. Now, because command file is a path, the command object is going to be this thing right here. Let's now push this command object onto local commands. So let's say local commands dot push, and we're going to push the command object, and finally make sure you return it. And I also realized the ban command doesn't really have an object. So let's just go ahead and copy this. Now let's change the name to ban, and we can say bans a member from the server. The next thing that we're going to add is, of course, the options, because when it comes to banning, we need to set options. So let's go ahead and set that up real quick. To use options, you have to import something from Discord.js. So let's say const require discord.js. And we need to import something called application command option type. Now options are of course going to be array of objects, and they're going to have a name. The name is going to be, let's say, target user. The description is going to be the user you want to ban or the user to ban. Required is of course true, and we need to set the type to application command option type to mentionable. The second option is going to be the reason, so I can just copy that and change the name to reason, and the reason for banning. Required is going to be false, or I can just remove it altogether. Type is going to be application command type dot string. Inside the callback, I'm just going to say ban for now, because honestly, we don't really have any time for adding any logic. The video is going to get very long. Now, I also realized the person running the command needs to have the permission. So we're also going to add that logic. So inside this, let's also import something called permission flag bits. And what we can do is we can add another property called permissions required. And we can set this to an array, and you can set this to an array of whatever permissions that you want to add. Let's copy this and let's just use the admin permission for now. Let's save this and we can close out of the ban file. Now let's work with the exceptions. So we're going to check if the name exists. So we're going to say if exceptions dot includes, and because we're using includes, let's just set this to an array by default. And if this includes the command object.name, then we can just continue, which means we can just skip this iteration of the loop and move on to the next one. We can now save this file and go to register commands, and let's just remove the console log for now. Now this file is going to have a lot of logic, so I am going to be moving a little bit quick. So the first thing that we're going to do is add a try catch block, and if there's an error, we can just say console.log. There was an error, and we can just pass in the error in here. Inside the try, the first thing that we want to do is get all the local commands. So I'll just put it in here. Now we also want to get application commands, so we can compare both of them to see if there's any difference, which also means we're going to have to create another files inside of utils called get application commands.js. And this is going to export a function. This is going to have two parameters. The first one is going to be the client, and the second one is going to be the guild ID if it does exist. And we're going to set this to an async function. Inside this function, let's first say let application commands, and let's first check if the guild ID exists. So let's say if guild ID. If it does exist, then we're going to get the commands inside that specific guild. So we can say const guild. We're first going to get the guild, and we're going to say await client.guilds.fetch, and we're going to pass in the guild ID. And then we're going to set the application commands to the commands inside the guild. So guild.commands. We can add an else, And inside this else, our bot is going to fetch the global commands. So let's say application commands equals await client.application.commands. Now these commands have to be fetched separately. So what we can do is we can say await application commands dot fetch. They have a fetch method and we can return the application commands from this function. So let's save this file, and inside register commands, we can say get application commands and we can import it, and make sure you pass in the client, and you can also pass in the test server, which is going to be the guild ID. Now what we want to do is we want to loop through all the local commands and then compare them to the application commands and see if there's any differences. So let's say for const local command of local commands. And what we're going to do is we're going to extract some information from them. Since they're objects, we can just destructure. So we can say const, and we're going to need the name, the description, and the options. Now let's check if the command actually exists on the bot. So we can say const existing command equals await application commands dot cache dot find, and we're going to find it by the command name. So we're going to name this command, and we're going to use an arrow function that is going to have a condition. The condition is going to check for the name. So we can say command dot name is exactly equal to our local command name. Now, since this is await, we're going to have to use async over here. And now if existing command does exist, we can compare them. Now we can say if local command dot deleted, and this is a property that we haven't actually added. So the idea is you can just add a property of deleted, and you can set this to either true or you can just leave it out completely. And if it is true, then the bot is going to delete this command. So for now, of course, I'm just going to leave it commented. So I'm just going to save the file like that. And if deleted does exist, then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and delete the command. It's pretty easy to delete a command. So let's just say await application commands dot delete, and we're going to pass in the existing command ID. So we can say existing command dot ID. And what we can do is we can console log that the command was deleted. So we can say console log, and of course we can break out of this current loop iteration. Now we're going to check if the commands are different. For that, we're going to create a utility function called rCommandsDifferent.js. And because there's a lot of repetitive code, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a link to this code in the description box. So just go ahead and copy it and paste it in your code. So firstly, it's of course exporting a function, and we're taking in the existing command and the local command as parameters. This if condition is going to check if the description is the same, or if the option's length has changed, or if the options have changed. Now, if you have the time, I highly recommend you read through this and see how the function works. For the rest, you can just go back and let's check if the commands are different. So we can say if are commands different, and let's import that. And what we can do is we can pass in the existing command and the local command. And if the commands are different, what we're going to do is we're going to edit the command to match with the latest local command version. So we can say await application commands dot edit, and the first thing that we're going to pass in is the ID of the command. So let's say existing command dot ID. The second argument is going to be an object, and we're going to pass in the description and the options. And we're also going to console log that the command was edited. Now, if the command is not already an existing command, we can set an else statement. Also, I realized this is not supposed to be break. It's supposed to be continue, because we want it to continue over to the next loop iteration. Inside of else, what we're going to do is we're going to check if the local command is set to delete. So what we can say is if local command dot deleted, and inside we're going to console log that we're skipping the registering of this command. And of course, we can just say continue because we want to skip this current iteration of the loop. Now the code over here is only going to run if the command does not exist and it's not set to be deleted. So let's create this command. So let's say await application commands dot create, and we're going to pass in an object. This object is going to have the name, the description, and the options. Let's also add a console log saying the command was registered, and finally we can save this file. Now I realized something, which is I did not add await over here to our get application commands. So make sure you do that. And because you're using await, make sure your function is async. If we save our file, you're going to see we have registered command ping and registered command ban. If we go to Discord and we check our test server and we type /, we can check our bot and we have ban and we have ping. The options are also working because if we go to ban, we see there's a target user, which is a mentionable. So let's just say we mention the bot itself. There's also a reason, which is an optional option. Now, of course, if you try to run the command, it will not run because we haven't really added that logic. So let's go ahead and deal with that. We can close out of these files now. Now go ahead and open the handlecommands.js file inside your interaction create event listener. And over here is where we're going to be handling our command. Now, the first thing that we want to do is we want to import our stuff from config.json. So let's say const, and we're going to destructure this and say require. Go up a few levels and import config.json. And over here, we're going to import the devs and we're also going to import test server. Now, the first thing that we're going to check is if the interaction is a chat input command. So let's say if interaction.is chat input command, then we can run all our code inside. However, I'm just going to remove this and I'm going to add return and I'm going to negate the value of this. And I did this just to have less nested code. Now, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to import our local commands over here. So if you remember, we have a utility function called getLocalCommands. I'm just going to open the file and I'm going to say const local commands equals getLocalCommands. And we can now close out of this file. Now what we're going to do is add a try catch block. Inside of this, we're going to say console.log there was an error running this command, and we can pass in the error. Inside the try block, what we're going to do is we're going to check if the command matches our local commands. If it does, we're going to use that object that we get. So let's say const command object, and we're going to say local commands dot find, and we're going to find based on the command, and we're going to make sure the command dot name is exactly equal to interaction dot command name. So let's save that. Now let's deal with the options inside our commands. These options over here, the dev only and test only. So inside handle commands, what we're going to do is we're going to check if the command object first exists. So if not command object, then we're just going to return. And the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to check if the command object does have dev only set to true. So let's say if command object dot dev only, if it is, then we're going to check if the person running the command is a developer. So of course we have imported devs from our config.json. So let's say if not devs includes interaction.member.id, then we can reply to the interaction by saying interaction.reply, and we can pass in the content saying only developers are allowed to run this command. And we can set ephemeral to true, so only the person running the command can see this message. And of course, we're going to return it because we don't want the function to run any further. Now we're going to do the same thing, so we can just copy paste it and check if test only is true. So I'm going to say if command object.test only, then we're going to check if the interactions server matches our test server inside config.json. If it does not, then we're going to reply with this command cannot be ran here and set ephemeral to true. And of course, we're going to return. Now, the next thing that we're going to check is if the person running the command has enough permissions. So if you remember, our command object has a permissions required property, which is an array of all the permissions. So let's check that. So I'm going to say if command object dot permissions required. Now, since that can be undefined, we're going to do optional chaining and check if the array has any length. If it does, then we're going to loop through all the permissions and we're going to say for const permission of command object dot permissions required. And we're going to check if the person running the command has enough permissions. So let's say if not interaction dot member dot permissions dot has, and we can pass in that permission. We can reply to the interaction by saying interaction.reply. We can say not enough permissions and set ephemeral to true. And this time we're going to break out of the loop because once the interaction has been replied to, we cannot run the loop again and reply to that same interaction. Now I want to add something very similar to this, but for our bots. Basically, some commands have permissions even for our bots. And if our bot does not have enough permissions, it's going to throw an error. So I can just duplicate this and call this bot permissions. And you can add whatever permissions your bot requires in order to execute that specific command. So I'm just going to save this And what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete the thing that I just copied because we're going to write it from scratch. We're going to say if command object dot bot permissions and optional chaining because this might not exist dot length. And if that array exists, then we're going to do something very similar to this. We're just going to say for const permission of command objects dot bot permissions. And now we're going to check our bot to see if it has enough permissions. So let's get the bot first. So I'm going to say const bot equals interaction dot guild dot members dot me. So I'm going to say if not bot dot permissions dot has. And we're going to check if the bot does not have this permission. Then we're going to reply to the interaction by saying, I don't have enough permissions. And of course, we're going to break out of this because we cannot reply multiple times to the same interaction. Now, with all of this in mind, if all the checks are fine, then we can run the command. So we can say await command object. And if you remember, the function is called callback. So we can say dot callback. And the things that this requires is the client and the interaction. So let's pass in both of them. And since we're using await, we're going to have to put async over here and we can save this file. Now, if we go to our terminal, you're going to see nothing else is coming up except our bot is online. And previously we saw that the commands were registered. Now, let's say we want to change our commands. So I can go to ban.js. And let's say I want to change my description. I'm going to change this description from bans a member from the server to bans a member. And I'm going to put like 3 exclamation points. Let me save the file and let's see what we get in the terminal. It says edited command ban. And if you go to our server, let's check ban. And as you can see, the description has changed to bans a member with like 3 exclamation points. If we set deleted to true, so let's just go ahead and add the deleted property and let's set that to true and let's save this. Let's check our terminal. It's going to say deleted command ban. So let's check if that is true. If we check our bot, the ban command has indeed been deleted. Now let's try running the ping command. So I'm just going to say /ping. Okay, it seems like the bot still did not respond, so let's see what's wrong. Okay, I realized that we added all this other logic inside of the devs only. So I can just go ahead and cut this and I can make this a lot smaller and put this outside of this if statement for dev only. So I can do this and I can save. Now let's try running ping again. Those are all the failed attempts. And now you can say the command does indeed run. So yeah, this is it when it comes to our command handler. This is a pretty advanced command handler. Later on, we might add on features to this like subcommands or slow mode. But for now, I think this will be totally fine because right now my recording is over 1.5 hours long. So it's pretty crazy. So anyway, if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a like. If you guys are having any problems, please be sure to join my Discord server. I'll have the link down below and I'll try to help you out over there. If you guys are enjoying my content, make sure to subscribe and I'll see you in the next one.